Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you see a link down below, you can click on it. You'll end up in Zoom. If you see a link there, you can click on it. And you'll end up in Mukana. And that's where you become a host for the show. You actually drive this whole show. We don't have a real agenda here. It's mostly what do people ask. So go into Mukana and ask those questions and vote those questions up. We spend a little bit more time on the front half of the hour than the back half of the hour. So getting in there and pushing questions up or down does make a difference in how we cover them. Now, if you think you can answer the questions, then come in early. We open the doors at 6, and you can come in and check and make sure that your system is working and that you're ready to answer those questions. You do need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the mic checks, or we can't include you. So come in by then, and we'll have you just make sure that you sound good and you're ready to kind of fit into the puzzle here. And then we'll start at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock is every day, 7 days a week is a open session on media and virtual production. So if you've got questions around any type of production, you can ask those questions there. The second hour is something that usually we spend just a little bit more time on. So we have a couple specific subjects. Today, we're going to talk about Final Cut. This is the 10th anniversary of Final Cut 10. So by request, some folks here, you can see I am reading the second hour suggestions. We're going to talk about it. We've got a couple people here who've been here since it started. So we'll talk about Final Cut 10 in the second hour. Tomorrow we're going to have a couple of Ruthless reviews this week. We're going to have audio Ruthless reviews on Tuesday and video Ruthless reviews on Thursday. These are a great time, even as an attendee, to kind of learn how we're doing what we're doing and what makes a difference there. So, but it is a warning for our panelists that, we're going to come and pick at everything. So that's Tuesday and Thursday. We've got, pretty excited, on Wednesday, we've got the creator of MixFX Pro, Adam Toe. He's going to be on to talk and answer your questions about MixFX Pro. A lot of us have been beginning to use it. It's adding a lot of value to our ATEMs. So we'll be talking about that. And then Friday, we're going to talk a little bit about USDZ. USDZ is the 3D file format. The USD file format is Pixar. USDZ is Apple, but it's really an open standard that's starting to pick up speed. And we're going to talk about why it's important and what we can do with it. And then, of course, on Saturday, we have our education roundup or round table. And that is not sent to YouTube. It's kind of a more frank discussion as we really get into nuts and bolts of planning what we think might be the next generation of education. So anyway, you're more than welcome to join. That one's a little later. That goes 9 to 11 because we have 2 hours of Q&A on Saturday and Sunday. Let's jump into the questions, Bill.
Great. Our first one this morning comes from Dan H. in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he says, hey, it's Prime Day. Is there anything good out there, or is it unload time for manufacturers?
Well, yeah, go Jason.
It's not AV related, but I bought a power washer at 50% off. So
there we go. Power washers. Go ahead, Jeffrey. By the way, don't use them on your electronics. That's all we're going to say. Is that, since we're talking about this, I know that your TV looks a little dirty, but don't do it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I haven't found it. Of course, being an Amazon Live influencer, I was on early this morning talking deals. There's a lot of laptops, a lot of desktops, a lot of gaming stuff. Not too much media stuff that I've found just yet, but we talked about the Jackery stuff, the power systems a couple days ago. Those are on a great discount. I think it's like 30% off, so you can check that out. And if anybody needs a link, I will give you non-affiliate links in Mukana for that.
Perfect. Thanks. Next question.
George Sita of Webster Grove, Missouri is up next with suggestions for less expensive mic to pick up attendees at a club meeting so attendees on Zooms can hear discussions of people there in person. It's a 25 by 25 foot room with 10-foot ceilings. The president has his own mic.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So miking anything at distance is always an issue. So there's all sorts of forms of mics. The only thing that really does that particularly well, and it's not a great sound quality, are what are called parabolic mics. You'll see them on the sideline of football stadiums and things like that to pick up the sound of hits on the thing. But mics all have to follow the inverse square principle, which means the farther the pickup is from whatever is causing the sound, it drops off in volume rapidly, the inverse of the square.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And so mics don't reach out.
Right, Mickey?
Yeah. Hey, I'm back. It depends. All right. So it depends on how big the room is, what the layout is like, how many people you're talking about. But first thing that comes to mind would probably be a whole slew of boundary mics on the tables. Mind you, they do pick up a lot of like hits and taps on the table, but it's a relatively affordable way to capture a good number of people. On the higher end of things, you might think of a conference system like the Shure ones that do auto mixing within a rack-mounted processor.
Yeah, the Shure Microflexes have a lot of different mic options. Everything from putting it into people's pockets to basically boundary mics to gooseneck mics. All of those work fairly well as far as putting those around and listening to the conversation. The thing to know is that for the online audience, it's probably going to stink. Like you just need to know that, unless you really go into doing mics often, the online experience is going to be bad. And just know that going into it. There's not really. We've done a lot of these, and it's never really turns out. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, a couple other options are the hanging mics. You can hang from the ceiling, or even an array mic. There are certain mics that sort of just pass signal when that particular mic element is touched, but for affordable, which this person asked, I think a few hanging mics would be best.
Yeah, one thing to look at is there's a box called an Octopus that will let you put a bunch of mics into it, and then it'll do a lot of auto mixing and a lot of auto mix with the other side as well. And you might be better off with a bunch of SM58s that you pass around. If you really want to include the audience, use an Octopus with a bunch of SM58s and pull it in. But everything else is going to be very roomy. As someone who's on the tail end of those, have listened to those for a long time, it's just a horrible experience. Next question.
Moving on to the next question, TJ Asher on the panel here says, I heard a song on the radio last week where it seemed all I could hear was breath intakes. For folks who record singing, do you ever edit out the breath intakes, and what determines whether or not to edit those out?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yes, we edit those out a ton, and it depends. One of the things that will make this worse is heavy compression. So if you have something where somebody has a gentle in between and you compress that signal a lot, it's going to bring those inhales up a ton. And I've had to go in, almost every audio editor I know has had to go in and literally take the breaths down, suppress them. There are automated tools that you can get that do that, but yes, you have to suppress breaths often.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. With something like a song, breaths is very much a creative decision. If you want to leave them in, you want to take them out, how much of them to leave in, how loud you want to keep them. It's very much so a creative decision that's done by the artists and the engineers. A former boss of mine used to work with Celine Dion. Celine came in with approved breaths on a flash drive, and they had to cut those breaths in. So it's
that's amazing.
It's a creative decision.
Go ahead, John.
Stan Burns figured out how to get breaths away from divers speaking. I don't know if it would help with singers.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of expanders or gates that can get rid of some of those things. If you listen to NPR, they actually leave the breaths in. It drives me crazy. All right, next question.
Jason Sipe of Marietta, California, here on the panel. NDI is a hot topic at the moment with NDI 5 forthcoming. Can the panel explain the difference between intra-frame NDI, regular NDI, and NDI HX, while also providing use cases for each scenario?
Stuart?
The simplest way I can say it is intra-frame NDI, every frame is a keyframe. Regular NDI, it's inter-frame compression, and it's long GOP. So group of pictures, whereas NDI HX is an exceptionally long group of pictures, so you've got more compression applied.
And the use cases? The intra frame is going to be the least compressed. You can actually edit it. Yeah. You can cut to it if you're recording. So that's where that's going to give you the most control in the post, especially, and it's going to be the most stable format and also the highest bandwidth format that you're going to use. The NDI is kind of an all-purpose one. NDI HX is less stable, but lighter. Go ahead, Stuart.
HX was developed for the Wi-Fi boxes. Problem is, the Wi-Fi boxes have about a 5-meter range, so they're completely useless as a Wi-Fi box because you're in the same room, you might as well run a cable.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae of Dallas, Texas is up next. Zoom has various hardware guides for large custom installations. For their ProAV studio for 2 to 5 people, they recommend a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K with an Olympus M.Zuiko Digital ED 12 to 40 millimeter f2.8 Pro lens. Is that a good pairing?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
I have it in my hands. Yeah, it's a micro four thirds camera, so that's going to translate into a 24 to 80, which on the Canon side, the 24 to 70 is like one of the top three of the holy trinity. So it's a nice range, but if you want anything telephoto, you're going to want something more like the 70 to 200. It just depends on how much reach. So if you're in a small 2 to 5 person, this lens can get you some, in like a 12-foot room, you can get some nice head and shoulder shots around the room. So I'd say that's a nice pairing. It's great, super sharp and 2.8. Yeah.
Great piece of glass. And so, yeah, I would highly recommend that as a pairing. I would still, if left to my own devices, go up to the 6K, if you can afford it, and then just go to Canon glass. So it just gives you a wider range to work with. But in the Pocket Cinema, to keep it really small, it works fine. Yeah. Next question.
Michael Fraley from Dallas-Fort Worth says, can anybody explain why a world clock won't work over the internet to sync connected unit?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Latency. That's a simple explanation. The signal you get from the world clock is coming via the internet, so it can take different paths, and those paths take different amount of time. Whereas if you're using a GPS sync clock, it's done mathematically from the same world clock and the same clock source, but all of the signals are synced exactly.
Bill, real quick.
It's even worse in the cell phone world. I did a test once where I had a bunch of people in a room tell me when they raise their hands up and drop them at the top of the hour when their phones changed over. Every group came down at a different time. There is no sync over those kind of broadcasts.
Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California said, when building a flypack where the A1 head audio person will oftentimes be remote, is it better to get a Behringer X32 or the new Behringer Wing?
Go ahead, Mickey.
In terms of remote control, I don't think there would be any significant difference between the X32 and the Behringer Wing. Behringer Wing has a bit more processing power, but in terms of remote control and the ability to send MIDI commands to it, there's not much.
I think the only difference is that the X32 kind of became a remote mixer where the Wing was designed for it. It's like they saw that people were using the X32 that way, and then kind of moved towards that design. And so I think that there might be more OSC, if I remember correctly, more OSC support within the Wing to really virtualize that. It's something that I've been looking at a lot myself recently, looking at between those and looking at where does the X32 Wing and QL1 kind of fit together, which one makes the most sense in different areas. So yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
Well, also, if you're talking about a fly pack, the Wing is a very large mixer, and the X32, M32, you can get in a 1RU.
Yeah, you can get the X32, either being a fully rack mountable or the producer will slide out as well. Yeah. Next question.
Mark Giuliani in Alexandria, Virginia says, when considering a polarizing lens filter for a Blackmagic 6K Pro, should one use a linear or circular polarizing filter to cut studio lights from eyeglasses?
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh boy, I'm gonna go with it depends, but I feel like Stuart's gonna have a better example here.
And go ahead, Stuart.
Actually, it doesn't depend. They're both not going to cut out all of the reflection. The real difference between whether you use linear or circular depends on which camera. If your camera's got an optical low-pass filter, get away with the linear because it's nice and cheap. If you've got something like a red, go for the circular ones because there's no filters on the front of the red sensors.
And your audio is falling apart, Stuart. We're not sure exactly why. So something to look at there. I use a linear because I have a linear filter on the light. so I have a linear filter on the light and a linear filter on the lens, and I align them to get some of the highlights out of my eyes. Go ahead, Jason.
I mean, I guess I'll just pick that up. So the easiest way to understand the difference is that a linear filter is only going to work perpendicular to your light source. So if my thumb is pointing up at the sun, the polarization is going to occur along the perpendicular axis.
And again, I'm adding a linear filter to my light as well as a linear filter to my lens. That's how.
I was just embellishing to try to.
Right, but it's but it's a completely different thing. Like it doesn't matter between the two. I don't think if you otherwise, but if you're trying to cut one specific thing, I think you need to use the linear if you're going to put it on the light. Otherwise, I think both of them will do some of the work. Next question.
Graham Cardwell of Belfast, Northern Ireland is next, and he says, we've noticed 2 to 3 frame audio drift ahead of video in our church streams over recent weeks. Any ideas how to address this issue? And he gives us some details about his workflow chain.
Looking at that workflow chain, you have Wirecast in there. If Wirecast runs into a high CPU usage, it will drop sync and it'll drift specifically. So really, you should probably never go over 60% CPU usage on a Wirecast, and I aim for 40 to 45. If I haven't used Wirecast for a little while, but that's generally where I aimed at, keeping it of what I'm asking Wirecast to do versus what it's there. You think, oh, I can run it to 100. No, and you will start to see anomalies at about 65%, and then they get worse after that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And that's actually with any type of software switching. If you get over 45%, you run into problems. Best thing to do to address this issue is to modularize. If you're first of all, if you're using a laptop to do your stream, go to a desktop. Get the power that you need. But if you can't get more than one machine to do different things, you can definitely go from computer to computer using OBS as well to kind of alleviate what the computer is doing. So it could go to the OBS and then stream from there. You can record from the Wirecast. You can move it around a little bit and actually have a better response.
And the biggest thing is to separate your encoding from your editing. That is the if you're going to separate out things, getting your encoding that have not the same machine encode that's doing the editing will make a huge difference in the stability of your platform. Next question.
Comes from Jesse Mills here in the panel from the San Francisco Bay Area. And Jesse asks, running an NDI output of OBS to a couple of Apple TVs with Sienna App and then to a projector and a TV monitor, there was some dropping of the signal. Anyone know of a reliable way to use the NDI out on OBS, or is vMix or something else more reliable?
Mickey?
I just want to ask Jesse, since he's in the panel, are you doing... does it work okay if you're only streaming out to one Apple TV, or does it break up even if it's just one Apple TV connected?
You know, I started with 2, so I did notice a little bit of difference between the 4K Apple TV and then the HD because they have different Ethernet ports on them. One has a gigabit and one is 100 meg. But yeah, so I should try just one. So you think potentially running out to 2 devices is bogging it down?
Yeah, depending on how many machines you're sending out to. I don't know if the OBS NDI plugin is capable of streaming out multicast. If it's not, then you might be saturating the Ethernet port of the machine that's transmitting. And yeah, depending on also what resolution and what frame rate you're spitting out, 100 megabit the Ethernet connection might not be enough.
So Jason?
Yeah, this is almost certainly about multicast DNS kind of shortcomings, whether it's on the side of the Apple TV, it could even be on the switch or at your source.
Is the OBS running on Mac or a PC?
It's on a PC.
So that'll be more stable. The other thing to look at is mismatching those internet connections, especially in a multicast environment, could just cause issues on their own. So if they were all the same, you may find that they're either both 100s or both 1 gig. You may find a higher stability rate. Go ahead, Jason.
When you say there's some dropping off of the signal, is it dropping to black or is it skipping and dropping between frames?
Yeah, it's freezing actually. It's so just running something like a video slideshow, it'll freeze on a particular frame.
So I've had that problem when there's been different connection issues. So when you mentioned the 100 bit and the 1 gigabit, that's probably your issue, like Jason was saying with the multicast.
Is it happening only with slides?
No, I mean, this is it's video playback. So yeah, so pretty much anything. It's a little unpredictable.
What I'm looking for there is when things don't move, in a long GOP environment, all kinds of bad things happen. So the thing is that when you put up a still in a long GOP environment, it's not laying any frames. It's like it's just going, okay, there's nothing there, and you can get into a state that will cause lag and something that feels like that, and you have to wait until the next GOP before it picks back up again, because it's not, so that is so if you have a 2-second GOP, it may feel like it's freezing for 2 seconds because it's waiting for the next GOP. But so a still frame inside of a long GOP environment. So if you're using NDI HX or even NDI, those are both, the NDI I think is 2-second GOPs, I believe. I'm not certain of that. And I think HX is longer than that. And so they're much longer than that. And so the issue is it makes it much smaller, but it becomes much more fragile when it comes to still frames hanging for a long time. So if you put up a still frame and we see that even in Zoom, we'll have a problem with some of that, with things not moving like a telestrator or like a teleprompter. You can get into lag. What we found is it's actually better to use other formats other than Zoom for the teleprompter, because of the Zoom doesn't like that still sitting there for a little while. Jason?
I would drop that 100 megabit end wherever it is that you're streaming that really quick, and do intra-frame NDI directly to what you were the other device, just because then you'll see if you're going to have that long op issue that Alex was talking about.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leland, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm whether or not he's using NDI through OBS as just a capture on the network through another source, or are you using the plugin that was built for OBS to use NDI within OBS?
Yeah,
that
just
can be a contributing factor.
Just the built-in OBS output as an experiment for the moment, but I have
okay. You might want to go grab the plugin then for the NDI source plugin for that. I'll leave a link in the Makana so that you can go find it.
Okay.
It may help what you're dealing with. Also, with the fact that you're using Sienna in that, I would get a hold of Jeff Keithley just to see if there could be a situation with Sienna that you're dealing with also.
Next question.
Comes from James Babbitt in San Diego. And James says, is there a tutorial for making a lower Fenwick, including an animated lower Fenwick? And for those who don't watch the show regularly, that's the little graphic at the bottom that shows mic chains here in office hours.
I'm afraid that's classified information. We can't tell you how to make Fenwicks. That's the kind of stuff. That's the secret handshake of understanding the black art of office hours Fenwicks.
As long as you're in the Illuminati, you'll totally get it.
But you do have to have the password.
You have to have the password and the handshake and the special wink, which I didn't do right there because we don't want to give it away. I don't think that I think that it's all built in Keynote, so it's just a matter of getting the transparency. We are going to talk about Keynote. We're already talking a lot about Apple this week, so I decided not to do it this week. But we will talk about Keynote in general, and one of the things we're going to show as part of like a little Keynote second hour is building the Fenwick. So we'll get Chris to. I got to make sure that Chris is going to be here for that. But we'll talk about building a lower Fenwick. Anyway, yeah. Next question.
Brett Ramsey in Melbourne, Australia says, with the Australian government shutting down community television, what's the best strategy for transitioning our live broadcast TV show to online? P.S. We have zero budget. Facebook first, then edited on YouTube or stream live to both.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The easiest is what I'm doing, and that's just basically build up a computer with your favorite stream software streamer. I use Wirecast because of the fact that it can go 24/7 on a stream without disconnecting. vMix has that problem. OBS is just a little bit too intensive when it comes to that. But yeah, if you build one machine, you can actually use that to go to anything. You could go to Restream, which could then stream to multiples, or you could just send one stream out to YouTube and dedicate it there.
Go ahead, Jason.
Building up a computer is not a free proposition, so I'm going to assume you're willing to spend a little bit of money on the propositions. So a WebPresenter HD, I've got a pair of them, and they are fantastic. They're incredibly stable, and they will take an SDI signal and broadcast it wherever you'd like. On top of that, add some Restream, and you're done.
Go ahead, Leland.
Only due to the fact that you could run into issues with the beginnings and endings of your video if you try to stream both to YouTube and Facebook simultaneously. Always the best option to take is to broadcast it to YouTube. You're going to get the best quality. You're going to get the best stream. And then if you need to get it on Facebook, either share the link from YouTube or download that video and upload it back into Facebook.
You are penalized if you share a YouTube to Facebook. So know that if you're not pushing the video out natively to Facebook, the viral push will be much lower than if you do it natively. Go ahead, Stuart.
Can I add to Brett's question? What about software for playback? And also, Brett, I will see you Wednesday at the Boogeyman Bar for the last episode of the live stream that we've been doing.
Jeffrey?
Last thing to remember, Facebook doesn't do 24/7 streaming. They will only do 8 hours a time, turn it off. I would highly suggest thinking of Twitch as an alternative.
I don't see anything here that requires a 24/7 thing. I think it's just broadcasting a live show. Go ahead, Beju.
I would actually say it would better be not to go 24 hours. Ideally, you want to split the content, the different programs you're doing, so make it easier for viewers to come and watch them rather than having to just watch one long stream and find the stuff or have to go and edit it later. So that might be part of the workflow you have to design for that. You can do OBS, you can use vMix. There are plugins for both of them, which are cheaper than getting dedicated playout software. Like you can get automation plugins, scripting for vMix, and I think for OBS as well, that you could start off with that and then maybe transition to a proper playout system later on, depending on how the budgets work out.
And again, I don't see a 24/7 thing. It's just a show, not the actual programming. But if it is 24/7, yeah, having it programmed, there is an advantage, and it's something that you're going to probably see us do later this summer here in office hours, of having something that's running 24/7 that someone can just turn on and they don't have to go find something again. So, it's just a curated thing where you just get to listen to something all the time. And so there is an advantage to that, of having that kind of run in the background. But I think that definitely getting things up in individual sections are good. The best thing to do if you're doing live is find audience interaction. So that's the thing, is figure out where your audience is, that you can take those questions. It can be either one. Your view time will be higher in YouTube, but you may end up with more comments in Facebook. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Within a discussion of the U.S. national security importance of the GPS system, one of the industries that was mentioned was the broadcast industry. How is this timing reference used? Wouldn't timing multiple sources be easier in the NDI 2110 era?
I don't know if it's a timing. I don't know if GPS system is used a lot by broadcast. I'm not sure if we're using it that often for timing. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I would think one where they want to do it is the security broadcast. Let's say you had a dam that was in danger of failing or something like that, to be able to locate both telephones, but also radio and television broadcasts of an emergency pending would be very useful. So I could see them using GPS to target like that.
Yeah, Stuart?
Douglas asked in the end of his question, how is the timing reference used? And to make things easy for Jesse, through one of these. This is an Evertz master clock that generates the sync inside a broadcast facility. It takes a GPS aerial and converts it into the same sort of Genlock and tri-sync that we use all over broadcast. That's the basics of it. The reason is, again, back to the question we were talking about before with using the world clock via the internet. This locks to the world master clock with the clock signal. Just making sure I don't get scratched by a cat at the same time, with the clock actually being synced everywhere to that same one signal coming back. So there can't be any latency, and the signals arrive regardless of where they're sent from with that embedded information, so that they're always buffered and played at the correct time worldwide.
Next question.
Rupert McRae of Dallas, Texas is up next with any comments on AVIXA, the Audiovisual Integrated Experience Association.
Never heard of it. so I don't have any opinion. I don't have an opinion about it because I've never heard of the association. I don't know if it's new or old, or so it's either very new or it is not very effective. so because I haven't heard of it. Go ahead, Beju.
I think they rebranded. They are basically the ones who run Infocom. So they are the installer associates. Okay. So it's more of for installers and for integrations rather than just for broadcast. So that might not be as familiar. But so they're pretty decent. Some of the training and their qualifications are pretty decent. Okay, and great. Especially if you want to get into installation or you do integration, you are often required to have those certifications. A lot of companies especially want that rather than just for other things.
Good, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I actually, I'm going to be speaking at Infocom this year, and I've been on a couple panels already. They're doing a lot more social stuff. They're really trying to build up the learning stuff, like Beju said. and a lot of certifications in AV for more on the business side than the broadcast side, but still, like building up conference rooms and things like that. But it's still all across the board. It's a lot of great content there.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with Infocom. I'm familiar with Infocom. I'm not familiar with the AVIXA, but Infocom is a pretty big deal. It's like the installation version of NAB. That's how I think of it, as like the integrated solutions for any that it's the same level of it. And there's a crossover about 20% of the vendors. Next question.
Johnny Estias in Manila, Philippines says, Mickey, you look great today. Do you have a different video chain?
I've been using an old iPhone as my camera for the past couple of months. I don't know what's different today. Well, the lighting changes every day because I have to take the lights down whenever I start mixing. So, yeah, I don't know. Different lights.
I think it's the camera. I've noticed it's been better for a couple months, and it's probably been the camera. The iPhone camera is better than a webcam.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it looks great. Next question.
Ron DeMuth from Great Falls, Montana says, audio monitors, in-ear or over-ear monitors, wired or wireless Apple earbuds hurt my ears.
We really try not to talk about religion here. So, this is going to be very complicated. We'll try to traipse around it without getting too upset and frustrated here. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, wired or wireless really shouldn't matter as long as you've got a solid body pack. These are Shure SE8 or 900, I think, and they're about $1,000. Those are fantastic. My backups are Sennheisers, and they are about $100, and they sound fantastic too. It's really just a matter of of what you're trying to accomplish.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I like the Apple EarPods Pro. That's what I'm wearing. It's nice when you get up from the desk. You don't have to unclip in the back, take off the ear monitor. So they sound pretty good too.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would say it depends what you're trying to do. If you need to do a critical listening where you need to make decisions or judgments on sounds to make adjustments to EQ, compression, mix sounds in general, you probably want to stick to a reference studio monitor. Some of the popular ones are the Sony 7506s, Sennheiser HD280s. There's a lot of them. They differ a lot in their signature. What's important is you learn the sound of whatever studio monitors you buy, and get used to the sound of that so that you have a reference of what's good and what's bad on those specific headphones.
Go ahead, Jason.
For me, I'm one of the very few people on this panel that use over-ear. The reason why is because anything I stick in my ear hurts, and unless I'm willing to spend $1,200 like my student did a couple years ago to get my own custom ear molds, it's just one of the things that is an issue or a problem with me. What I've also noticed, though, and maybe this is different for some other people, is that I do hear different sounds with cans versus in-ears. I just hear the room or hear the noise differently. If you are going to buy one and stick to one, please stick to one as much as you possibly can so that we get used to the sound like everyone is saying.
I have to admit, I switch all over the place. For general meetings, I have Ear Heroes that I'm using right now that seem to work pretty well for me. I forget that they're in there, so sometimes I walk away with them, which is a little unfortunate. And then I have I have some Audio Technicas that I put over what I'm doing critical listening, but I don't like to have them on when I'm doing a show. So but the Ear Heroes are very small and they fit in, and they tend not to hurt so much. Bill and then Barry, real quick. We're gonna keep moving.
Just make sure you take them out occasionally and do clean them in between. I've had some minor ear infection problems with leaving these things in for hours and hours on office hours calls. So give yourself a break and you'll be better off.
Go ahead, Barry.
He doesn't say whether it's the wired or the wireless that hurts his ears. So I would say because the wired hurt my ears over a period of time and they fall out. But I just recently got the iPod Pro, and I can wear them all day without them falling out, and they don't hurt at all.
What's been interesting is if I'm not on video, I'm almost always wearing the AirPod Maxes because they're so comfortable. Just wander around the house with them. They're great. Next question.
George Kennedy Jr. here on the panel says, I find wearing glasses reflect anything I'm doing on my desktop back into my lens. Is there any way to prevent this?
One way to prevent some of it is dark mode. So, I mean, a lot of us use dark mode a lot because of that. Go ahead, Jason.
Second is just angles and math. If you actually take a look at the back part of my screen right now, I have a TV reflecting back behind me. Right now, you can't see anything, but if I switch over to put something white here, this is actually a reflection from this monitor to my left that's bouncing off the glass from my monitor, which is bouncing off the glass on the TV behind me. So making sure that you have your setup correct for light and the way it reflects and refracting will help. As a matter of fact, when I go into dark mode, which I have my computer on right now, and I put on my own glasses, I don't get any reflection, but you'll see if I look up, all of a sudden the light reflects back. So it really depends on the positioning that you have for your particular monitors.
And the other thing is having a lot of key light. So the more key light you have, the more it's going to overload anything. As you move that exposure, you'll see a lot less of it in your face. Go ahead, George.
So Makana does a good job of if I put it in front of me, because it's pretty much in dark mode. It's just a dark in the face. But I know Alex has mentioned before, I know it's definitely distracting, and I try my best not to do it when I'm on office hours, because I know Alex pays attention to that. So yeah, I know you've mentioned it before. So I'm always seeing the browser, depends what browser what site I'm going to, it might be all white. So it gets that reflection. So I'm kind of trying to be conscious of that.
Yeah, friends, don't let friends make white-based sites, like white background. Like every time I open it, because in a person in a dark mode, it's painful. Next question.
Johnny Estias from Manila is back with, I bought a pair of audio implements IFB kits. It may have been pure bad luck, but both of the clarifiers were defective and I had to return them. Can anyone recommend any other IFB brand or manufacturer?
I mean, they are the standard. There's definitely other ones, but Mickey?
I'm a big fan of the Bumblebee and also the N-ears. Essentially the same thing.
Yeah. So N-ear, Bumblebee. Those are the what are the it's the
Sidekick.
Sidekick 2, I think, is the new one. Or is it? I think there's a Sidekick 3 now.
Yeah, I saw an ad for Sidekick 3.
Yeah, and then I have the Ear Heroes, but I also have the audio implements. I've never heard of the clarifier going bad. I didn't even know that was possible. So that's an interesting. I mean, I've bought literally hundreds of those. So it's an interesting puzzle there. Next question.
Alex 40 Goldner in London here on the panel often says, can anyone recommend a portable external enclosure for SSDs that connects to Macs using Thunderbolt 3? USB 3.1 isn't fast enough.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think our friends at OWC have something exactly like that. So look on their website.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, more specifically, the OWC Envoy Express is very reliable, and that'll support an NVMe M2 SSD.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I got to ask Alex what he's doing that that actually needs that sort of speed. But I would think LaCie would probably be your best bet for something rugged that will survive being carried around everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
and there's also the Samsung T5s as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, last Prime Day, I bought 3 of these 4 terabyte drives, SSDs, 2.5-inch SATA SSDs. So,
and are they reading? But are they getting out? The drives themselves are only 500. They max out at 500 up and down, and really 500 down, and usually 400 to 450 up. So I don't know if you'd get. I think they fall short. Most SSDs. NVMEs will go up higher, but the SSDs, I don't know of any SSDs that go over 550 megs a second. And your USB 3.1 should go to a gig or 900 and blah, blah, blah. So,
because I got one of these kind of.
And what is your speed test showing?
It's something like 160 to 200 megabytes per second.
I must have saved a lot of money on that connection because we buy a lot of them and they're all hitting about 400 or 500. Like the ones we get that look just like the one you have are all hitting 400 or 500 megs a second. So cool. I think you just might not have one that is great. And that's the real problem with USB-C in general is just that it's a wild, wild west. I've never, it's just so many different standards and so many different ways that we get cables that only do 30, and then we have other cables that do 1,000 or 900. So yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just wondered if Guy, our resident hardware guru, had any suggestions. He knows a lot about hardware.
No, actually on this one, I'm kind of drawing a blank. I don't have anything in particular that I'd recommend on those.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
For many years, this is the Seagate, the old school PCIe adapter, and they made a micro one with a sled that was, whoa, that was loud. They made a micro adapter with a sled that was fantastic. And, for many years, I would take Thunderbolt 1 or Thunderbolt 2 over just about anything. I think Alex was the same way. But no, there's a reason that USB-C is not typically a thing where you can just get a straight-in connection, and it's because of the variance of internal SSD speeds.
If you're listening to this, Alex, it's okay. Everything is okay. No one died there.
It's Prime Day, Alex. You can get new computers cheap.
Exactly. Next question.
Brian Anderson, Silver Springs, Maryland, here on the panel often. I'm updating presentation templates for the office. I've always made 4x3 and 16x9. Would in this day and age do 4x3? Would you still do 4x3 templates? How prevalent is 4x3 as an aspect ratio these days in hotels and conference centers? People tend to default to 4x3, and it makes me nuts.
Jason?
I'd say the only remaining utility of 4x3 is if you are doing broadcast with picture-in-picture. If you're going to put a graphic right up here, it might make sense. But as a rule, if you're doing production, don't waste your time.
I mean, for a long time, one of our biggest things with slides is converting everybody's 4x3 to 16x9. So it's I would it's just this constant. It's a good job if you want to give someone a job that they want to do to constantly convert them. But 4x3 also, I think nowadays when someone pops a 4x3 up, it feels very old. Like it just feels like, wow, you're pretty far behind now. So I think that as someone who's, because remember that most of your presentations now find their way online, and when you go online with 4x3, it really feels like you're going back to the 80s. Go ahead, Jason.
I just checked Office online, and they default to 16x9. I know Google defaults to 16x9.
Took us forever to get there.
But everyone that uses 4x3 is typically using applications that are on the desktop of that computer, so whether it's a PC or a Mac, and usually that computer is from about 2016 or earlier. Yeah. So if you're seeing that stuff, it's people just haven't upgraded hardware.
Yeah, I would just put your foot down on that one. Go ahead, Stuart.
About the only reason in 2021 to use 4x3 is IMAX. And unless you're using a massive camera with open gate, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just don't do it.
Yeah. Next question.
Shane Foley in Ashland, Oregon is up next. Alex, you've previously mentioned the power of combining Keynote and Motion. What is it that makes the combination so powerful, and what specific functions within Motion should a Keynote user learn to benefit their content and workflow?
The only place that I really combine those two is the fact that I have begun to, and I'll show it next week when we talk about Keynote, but I'll show you doing it. Motion imports USDZ. So what you can do is go into Motion and build an animation in USDZ and then just export it out with an alpha channel and play it back in Keynote. So it appears, especially when you're keying over your presentation, I just don't have one at my fingertips right now. You can actually have it part of your presentation, have a 3D model that you created. Now, someday we all hope that USDZ support is in Keynote and I don't have to use Motion to grab that. But the other side of that also is there are places where you can do a lot of work in Motion where you can get a lot of those animations out. And really, one of the things that I do with it is I use it as a way to template, or figure out how we're going to do a show. And I can animate everything very fast in Motion. Then I go into Keynote and I reanimate a lot of that stuff so that it has all the little keyframing that is nice in Keynote. In Motion to do. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. But the primary way that I do it is either I use it as a storyboarding device for Motion projects because I can get very close to the final very fast, or I use Motion to go the other direction and bring 3D objects. 3D text is really cool, by the way. So you want to have great 3D text in your Keynote document. You can take the 3D text and create it. The 3D text tool inside of Motion is unbelievable, worth the $50 by itself. I mean, it just renders out these gorgeous 3D, and you can animate them, but just as a still image, they're gorgeous. Go ahead, Jason.
I'd say where the two overlap for me is that both are pro level, even if Final Cut doesn't look pro level, but Motion is designed to keep each of your layers separate, and it does so throughout the entire process. So the nice thing is if I'm working in Motion and I need layers 3, 5, 7, and 9, I can select them, export them separately, and bring them right back into Keynote, and it's easy.
Yeah, so it's pretty slick. Just the text. So I was going to try to find you this Like this is, let's see if I can, no, I can't show it to you. All right, next question.
James Babbitt, San Diego is up next. It says there is merchandise, merch for the remotes. Is there also merch for office hours?
It's coming. So I'm figuring out a couple things related to it, and then we'll have some merch. So we want to. There's a bunch of business things that have to happen first. So we're finishing the 501c3. I don't want to take any. I just don't want to take any money from anybody until I have it inside of a box that makes sense. And so what I want to do is make sure that the merch that has office hours is putting money back into supporting office hours, and not going somewhere else. So go ahead, Jason.
I think at this point, Bob Heil should probably make an office hours edition of the PR40.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna. We were talking over the weekend that we may. I have an Amazon Live account that I haven't used, and one of the things we were joking about is that you're supposed, if you do an Amazon Live, you're supposed to sell something. So we're talking about putting the office hours merch into Amazon, and then the only thing you can buy during office hours is just the merch. Like we're not gonna it'll just come up as in the things, because I don't want to tie us talking about gear to things that we're trying to sell on Amazon, but we just have merch there. So if you want to buy a mug or you want to buy whatever, so we'll talk. We'll have a merch discussion when we get a little bit further along. Now, next question.
Comes to us from Alex Forney-Golder in London. And Alex says, if I was to visit the U.S. in October and could only visit NAB or VidCon, which should I choose?
Jason.
NAB, without question, and I'll totally take you out.
Guy.
Yeah, definitely NAB for your alley. I've helped in the road booth at VidCon, and it was a younger demographic for sure. And it's really about YouTube and influencers commingling with other influencers. In fact, they have like an after evening session that's just all influencers, but the general public comes in during the day, and it's just a bunch of booths. So NAB is more up your alley with the hardware and being around people more your own age, Alex.
Go ahead, Leland.
NAB, because a lot of us are going to be there. So come visit us, meet us in person. I think that's going to be a really cool place to be this year. So October, 9th through the 11th, come to NAB.
One of the volunteering things we're going to have people have an opportunity to do is I think we're going to figure out how we're going to put up I got to figure out how to fund it, but I want to get a club, some kind of room in either the Renaissance or the LVH, or I think it's now Westfield. And we've done this in the past for CES and other ones, but what we want to do is set up a studio so that we can bring vendors, into the studio to talk to us, sort of to project back out to us. And so if people are interested in that, that'll be one of the things that people can, because we need people who are going to be there to crew it. And then I'm going to probably try to take the week off and just do that all day with all of you, where we just bring people in. We want to try to get a live view unit so that we can wander around through the expo. So the idea is to really figure out ways to include the office hours community from all over the world to the into the program itself. Go ahead, John.
And after NAB, it'd be a perfect time to take a vacation to beautiful Monterey Bay.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, George.
Alex, I think somebody in this world, office hours is pretty huge now, will be willing to give you a little space on the show floor. So I don't know that you have to go too far.
I'm not, I have to admit that I'm not that interested. I'm less interested in the show floor and more interested in a place that's a little bit separated from it, mostly from
It's just too loud.
The funny thing is I've done, so Twit's done show floor, I've done show floor, we've all done show floor, and I don't think that there's so much walking anyway. If you can go to the Renaissance, especially the Renaissance, if I can get a booth, and I don't know if I can or not, if I get a room, like a good large room in the Renaissance, that would be the best. But either in Westfield or Westfield's nice because for less money you can get a really big room. They have suites upstairs. We've rented out the suites that are 2 or 3 rooms of.
It's the Westgate.
Westgate. Yeah, they keep changing the name, so I can't keep track. It used to anyway. So it used to be the Hilton, then it was the LBH, and now it's Westgate. So that's the only hotel I've gone to in Vegas for I don't know how long. So the only one I think was the Nines or whatever. Anyway, so the idea though is that the walking to that hotel or the walking to somewhere else in the South Hall is about the same. Those places are so big. And then what you can do is you can have a green room and you can have it all set up and it's quiet and especially in the kind of interaction that we're trying to have. I think that I'm I'm open to it, George. If someone gave us space, I might think about it. The other issue is that the bandwidth is a lot less expensive in the hotels than it is in the convention center. Because wow, that's an eye popper. But if it's something that there's a spectacle to it that would be useful on the floor. That would be kind of fun to have a big office hours presentation. People would see us going by and see a bunch of people watching these weird shows. They're weird shows though. And again, the problem that I have is that it gets very close to a hybrid where I have people looking out to the folks that are there, where what I really want is them only to look at the teleprompter of us. So the goal that I have with this is that people aren't coming in and being part of a roundtable discussion. They are literally coming in with a giant teleprompter in front of them with a multi-camera setup for them to talk about their product. And they're not talking to somebody else in the room. They are talking to us. It's a digital first, they're talking to us out here now. And that's a very different experience than anybody's doing in NAB, is to have this kind of, you're going out to, I think that if we promote it, probably 2,000 or 3,000 people, as a vendor. And so I think that it'll be an experiment. We'll see how it works. But I think that I'm leaning that way. And then if it works at NAB, of course, we'll do it at IBC and then CES. It'll just, we'll just keep rolling down the path. And I think it'll get bigger each time we do it. And I think it's one of the big engines for what we're doing. Go ahead, Jason.
That sounds great. Well, count me in as one of the guys on the floor. I'll be there as credentialed press, and I'm sure some other panelists will be too.
Well, the big thing that I do want to do is go through the evening, the showstoppers and those types of things. I want to do that with a live view and a camera, so that we do exactly what we're talking about, where questions are coming in from the online audience, and we're going literally from booth to booth to booth to booth to booth, as like a 2 or 3 hour experience. I think it'll be really cool. Next question.
Keenan Campbell, Princeton, Illinois. And Keenan says, thinking of the future of office hours, would it be beneficial to develop a database of trusted members with location and a detailed list of gear? It seems like it would help as our community grows, maybe a secure area on the new website.
It's coming. Yeah, being able to find people is coming. So, I think at first we're going to, there's at first there's just a matter of people being able to register what city they're in, just so that we know. I've already been hiring people based on their Discord location. If they've been on the panel, or they've asked good questions, or they've been in Discord and I've watched them talk about things, and I figure, they look like they'd be useful for that thing. And then I know where they're at. I've hired people, almost every week at this point, to do something, go drop something off, pick something up, and then sometimes do production, that type of thing. So it's super useful for us to have those, to know where those things are. The goal will definitely be to build that back out. There's other things you could do if you knew where everybody was, like build physical spaces. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's interested in YouTube. He notes they recently closed their physical YouTube space facilities to move toward an online first model for supporting operators with high quality facilities that were at spaces. Do you think this is an overall loss to the community as a whole?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Only in the city where those spaces were located. Because if for everyone else worldwide, and YouTube, like all social media, is a worldwide platform, for anyone else, it's impossible to get into and use. So they were really only relevant for the people living in the same city.
Well, and also they were booked out almost all the time. So they were used, they were definitely used, but it was really hard to get into them and use them for any usable amount of time. Also, they were very catering towards the very large, they would build sets for the very large creators. But as a smaller creator, you were kind of not able to book time, in a useful way. Finally, their live activations were so heavy, they were using pretty complicated setups for the live, which we could run. So we came in to run events out of the YouTube thing. So we could take over and run their events, but not many people could. And literally, I think in LA, it sat for a year before we came in and did a live out of it. It didn't really get used because it was too heavy. Go ahead, Jason.
YouTube also is still putting pop-up spaces in different places, so they're still going to be focused on community building, not so much on the big, large things like they were before. Yeah. They found out that they got more return on their investment from the community and the interaction with the community, as opposed to doing the big events. The big events were good, and it did provide a lot of, I guess you'd say, marketing for YouTube, but they found that the more interaction they got, and they got more power users by individuals creating communities. So they're going to be focusing a lot more on communities.
Some of them are really cool. We spent a lot of time in the Playa Vista and New York ones, and they were cool spaces. Next question.
Brian Carpenter in Cleveland, Ohio. My volume control on a pair of THX external PC speakers pops when adjusting. Does spray cans of cleaner lubricator work? Are there brands or types of these products suggested, or should they be avoided?
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
What you want to look for is what is called contact cleaner. It's meant for cleaning electrical contacts. And you want to spray a bit of it on the potentiometer, the little variable resistor that's there that acts as the volume control. And use a very soft toothbrush or a very soft bristled tool to clean off the track of the potentiometer. And also, this is one of the reasons why it's good to, when you're not using your equipment, keep all faders down, all knobs all the way down, or whatever is, 0. If that means 12 o'clock, keep it there when you store the equipment. Or if that means like turn it all the way counterclockwise, keep it there when you're not using the gear.
Jason and then Leland real quick.
The only thing that I would add to that is that contact cleaner is extremely nasty, so wear gloves when you're doing it, and if that doesn't work, the variable resistor is pretty easy to switch out, assuming you can open up the speakers and just solder a new one.
Yeah, Leland real quick.
These devices, I have a similar device on my Bose 2.1, is very susceptible to static electricity, so make sure your room is static free, or at least try to control that in your environment.
Next question.
Ash Shadev, New York City. Ash says, inspired by office hours, I have volunteered to help the New Jersey chapter of the Wharton Club host their hybrid events on Zoom. Hybrid event will have 2 cams in a large room with 5 mics. How should I feed in the 5 mics to Zoom? And he has a 1 Alex budget.
Go ahead, Jason.
A simple analog mixer. I would use a Z from Allen and Heath. That would work very nicely, and you'd get at least 4 aux out.
Not a big fan of analog mixers.
I know,
Yeah,
but
so
1
Mickey-
Alex budget. What are you going to get for $700?
You could get
Mix
there's
pre,
some-
okay, yeah.
I think Zoom has some stuff that's below that, and then at that Alex budget, you're a little bit further along. You can get a Mix Pre 3 or 6. That would probably do it as well. Mickey, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, aside from the Allen and Heath, there are also options from the likes of Yamaha. They have the MG10 XU, and also Soundcraft also has a few choices there. How much is an XR12? Like what?
Yeah, that would be like an XR18 would be under $700. So an
Yeah,
XR18 would be
There you go.
a great box at $500 or $600. An XR18 you'll use a lot for a long time. It's a really, really great box for the price. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, when ESPN aired Korean baseball early in the pandemic, the feeds from Korea were backhauled via Zoom. How would they bring those feeds in without the Zoom logo, as I see when watching office hours on YouTube? How would they guard against Zoom bombing?
Jason.
Pretty simple. I'm sure the likes of ESPN can make their own deal independently with Zoom.
But also, I think that they were backhauling him with Zoom. But I think that you just screen scrape and you end up. We can do it without Zoom too. We just do it this way because it's easy. So we do it every day. We're going to be moving away from that over the summer. But it's easy for us to get rid of the logo if we don't want it. It's just that it requires a little bit more infrastructure than we're spending at the moment. But we'll be adjusting away from that over time. Next question.
David Brady, New York says, looking to up the game at the HOW? That's not making sense for me. We're considering live stream studio.
House of Worship.
House of Worship. Thank you. Hoping to get volunteers on board with production. Pros and cons and the hows of the learning curve.
Live stream. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, live stream studio is incredibly easy to use. I know Alex doesn't like it because of the remote call feature, and it does blow. I mean, they should just take it out. I mean, they should just. Without that, I mean, it's really a powerful program, and I'm serious. They're sitting on a gold mine. Those guys, if they would listen to me, they would allow that to have a 60-day free trial, put it in the cloud, and just let people bang on it because it works amazing. It's super stable, and the only downside is it's only got 3 GFX. So, like, if I want to do 3 picture-in-a-pictures or super sources, that's it, unless somebody knows of another way. But as far as like, it was built back in the day, like 2013, 2014, it had these hardware boxes, and it was just really easy to use because you could touch the screen and just pick the source. And so some of that functionality is still there. And so it just depends on how that volunteer is going to interact with it. I mean, the audio is super simple. So I've noticed for House of Worship people, they just need, they're volunteering their time. They just need super simple instructions. Camera 1, camera 2, fade, fade to black, and maybe a graphic, and that's it. And that software is super easy to use. It's a step above OBS, so I mean, super powerful. Oh yeah, and then add SRT, and then it's a game changer.
I'd probably still lean with an ATEM Extreme with Presenter Pro. So because it's got all the worship stuff, and then you have it there, and it's kind of separated out. Because when you have volunteers, having one person doing all of it, I'd rather have more. I'd rather spread it out, in that process. And it depends on the house of worship and how many people you have available to you. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, the thing is though that I think it's $70 a month, and you get access to live stream, which is Vimeo now, and you can push it into there without having to worry about copyright, I believe, because it is I think your whitelisting. Is it cup?
It doesn't. That's not the problem. But it's $70 a month. It'll add up over time, And then the other thing is that it's pretty heavy code. It's not efficient. So it may be stable, but it's not efficient. And so you really need, you're going to spend some real money on the hardware if you're going to do anything complicated with it, because it's very, very inefficient code. Like, it just wasn't written well. And so it's not that it breaks, well, except for the remote control and the calling. so other than that, every time I've used it, and again, it has broken. But most people say it's really stable. The guy says it's really stable, so I take his word for it. But
I've ran it for hours in 4K, and it outputs 4K direct to Vimeo just great. It's just if you try to push it to its limits, it'll break.
You didn't push it very hard, and it was just like, oh, it's broken again. So anyway, that's been
try
my
again
experience.
with upgraded hardware. I mean, I'm running it in the cloud on a G4D and 4X, and
it wasn't in the cloud.
The
it was on a
CPU
computer.
go up to 99. Yeah. So the hardware they used to sell is outdated. Like it was never meant.
No, it was like off the shelf stuff. Yeah, it's like installed onto a pretty beefy machine, but it was still not enough. So
give it another chance.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael, when I watch office hours via Zoom on my 802.11n Wi-Fi access point, I frequently see your internet connection is unstable, error messages, and garbled audio and video. How do you avoid a similar issue when using mobile Wirecast or Wirecast networks in broadcast?
Go ahead, Jason.
We use a lot of them, but Wi-Fi and cellular are not the same thing, and what disrupts them is not exactly the same thing. So it's not really a fair comparison.
Wi-Fi is a horrible real-time platform. Like that's the big thing. It wasn't built for that. It's built for sending you packets, but it every time anything happens, like a mesh network in your house or a building is a disaster for Wi-Fi. And it works great when you're surfing the web and you're downloading videos and you're watching them. What it doesn't work well for is real-time communication. So when you're watching Zoom, where there's no buffer and it's real time, you're going to see all kinds of breakup on Wi-Fi at all levels, because it's not a format that's built for that. It just wasn't designed. When they designed it, they didn't design it for that because it didn't exist. And so it's dropping packets all the time. And when you have no buffer, those packets show up in your experience. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, if there is a Wi-Fi network, that means there is a way for you to get a wired connection. So, I mean, just frankly speaking, there's Wi-Fi, you can get a cable somewhere. But if you do have to work with a mobile connection, there are several solutions such as Peplink that would do bonding for your connection.
And
but
again,
it ends up on their server, which then recombines all those separate feeds.
And then bonding will make it, again, in a real-time communication, bonding's even worse than mesh. Like because it multiplies the jitter. So it's just a complete, like bonding will be even worse than mesh to do that. So, if you want to watch office hours, you can know that it may break up in Wi-Fi or get it wired or watch it on YouTube, because YouTube will work all the time. It just takes a little longer. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, Jeffrey, the Amazon Live workflow seems to rely on an iOS app, even though the app allows you to stream using a custom RTMP URL. Do you think the workflow would still be as low friction if it were to move to a web-based platform?
And Jeffrey's not here, so we'll have to ask that question another time. Next question.
Moving on, Paul Prusakowski of Gainesville, Florida says, does anyone have experience with Blackmagic external SSD recorder for URSA or URSA broadcast? Seems the only one I can find available is for 12K, and it states it's not compatible with URSA broadcast.
Go ahead, Stuart.
That seems backwards. The 12K records directly to an SSD for its RAW. It doesn't need the external recorder. The SSD recorder was designed specifically for the first generation of Ursa to use the SDI out for the raw output. So, yeah, I don't think the question is correct in itself.
I think that it should, that external SSD recorder should work with everything except for or it can still work with anything that has SDI out. It should work with it because it's just an SDI recorder. If we're all talking about the same one.
No, that's not correct, Alex. That's not correct. The G2 Ursa doesn't need it. It records raw
it doesn't need
to an SSD. It doesn't do it via the SDI out. A friend of mine literally has bought one of them, and I've tried it.
No. What I'm saying is that it doesn't. The SDI, if I understand which one we're talking about, it will work with everything that has an SDI out because it's just taking the SDI feed. If you want to record the raw,
only the generation 1 has the raw out on the SDI connection.
I'm not talking about raw.
The other ones don't have it.
I don't think it.
Well, that's what the raw recorder's for.
But
that's the external raw recorder.
But it'll still record. It'll record anything that you play into it. It doesn't have to just do raw. We've used it for other things. Yeah. So anyway, next question.
Hasmut Yajar of Cape Town, South Africa. Our friend says using ATEM Extreme and SuperSource, trying to insert a lower third on the ELF boxes that have the talent as the source. I'm sorry, I must be mistyping there. He wants to use a Luma key or a downstream, or should he use a downstream or an upstream key? Is it possible to have the lower?
And one thing I will say that it's really important for our producers. And Hasmuk asks great questions, but it's really important to read them a couple times and really make sure that you're handing us something that we can read out loud. As we kind of move forward, we're going to start skipping questions that aren't formed well. So any misspellings, anything else, just so you know that if there's a bunch of misspellings in there or any misspellings, we're probably going to start just cutting the questions because it's just we're getting into this thing where we have more questions every day that have that. You always want to, almost always want to have lower thirds go in a downstream key. And that way, primarily because you want to record a clean version without those and then the downstream, but you almost always use downstream key for your lower thirds. Go ahead, Jason.
More specifically, the second downstream key is what you should be using because I believe the SuperSource is going to use for the overlay the first downstream key.
I don't think it does. The SuperSource
does it have its own layer?
It's got its own layer. You can still have two downstream keys, but the second downstream key is on top of the first one. So it is the last thing to go out. So the thing you would do is you'd either do the lower third there or you put a bug on the second and a lower third on the first. So that'd be the two ways to look at that. Go ahead, Beju.
Yeah, I was talking to Hasmukh about this earlier. The question, I think, was that if he's building a SuperSource, can he have a third layer on top that just shows the title on one half of the screen, on one of the inputs coming in? So he can have and he doesn't have to custom resize it. He can just have a standard template and then it resizes onto that input. So he can just have the standard inputs either in the media pool or coming through an input, which just fits it over one of the SuperSource sources.
You could use a macro to scale it, like to just expand it out, but that'd be a lot of work.
I will tell you that we've done a lot of work where we had a client that really wanted to put lower thirds on every SuperSource. It's super painful. I'm just letting you know, just know that that's a world of pain. If you know who's going to come in, the other thing to remember is you can build overlays in something like Keynote that just have all the overlays, and then you just drop those in as an input and key them. And you can do those as Luma keys as long as you don't put black in the foreground. But you can do that in Keynote, or you can do it also in QLab. Those are things that can be done as well. But Keynote's nice because you can edit things very fast and then just hit them and go. Next question.
Our friend and often panelist Roscoe Jones says best security system and infrared emitters for a concert hall space.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I could give you infrared emitters. I use them because the tiny little security camera infrared emitters that are outside in my house are terrible. So I turn them off, and you can get them on Amazon. They're waterproof and massive floodlights for infrared, and they will fill up an entire space easily. I'll put a link in Makana.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, how do bands handle traveling with equipment when they aren't using dedicated chartered transportation? Do they use a freight forwarder or just check it all as baggage?
Go ahead, George, real quick.
I know American Airlines will handle bands effortlessly. I'm not sure about other vendors.
For smaller bands, you can United will take up to 24 cases per person at $50 a bag domestic, $70 a bag international. And it is up to 100 pounds per bag. So you can move a lot of gear, and that's per person. So you can, the record that we've had to move gear is about 40 bags to Japan overnight. So about 2 tons, literally. No, I'm sorry, 1 ton. 1 ton of gear we moved overnight for about $1,300. So anyway, it's you can do a lot as a band if you want to be edgy, but once you get past that, you're using Rocket, and that's your dedicated Rocket's business is rock and roll. All right, next question.
Gualberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia says, does anyone know if there is a limit on how many pages you can cross-post a live video to on Facebook?
Go ahead, Leland.
There's not necessarily a limit to the number of pages, but there are 2 eligibility requirements. One is you have to have the cross-posting relationship built with the page that you're going to cross-post to, and you also have to be an admin of that page. The problem that you'll run into that you have to consider is that Facebook treats all of these cross-posted videos as actual separate live broadcasts, so you won't be able to see comments or anything from the videos in other locations, and also the fact that the viewers will not know where that original video is coming from.
Yeah, we found that it wasn't. We have the most I've ever done is 36 pages out, from a single event, and it just fragments your viewership a lot. What the big advantage of it is, it takes advantage of the viewers of every one of those pages. So it was a lot of organizations that all want to be part of something, and so that cross post is something that's very popular. But my recommendation is to have them actually just post that, as a to like it or forward it, or to cross post it, rather than using the cross-posting tool just to do it manually, because it brings the entire audience back into a singular conversation. All right. Now we're going to, we'll ask it. Liberty White asked Prime Day. We already covered that a little bit, Liberty, if you're still watching here. Asked about Prime Day, and we found that there was a power washer that Jason found that was really great.
We covered it, but Liberty, we missed you on the panel. Come back.
Liberty was on yesterday, and
was
I
she?
think, yeah, we had Liberty on yesterday.
Okay,
so,
I missed yesterday.
So, but yeah, Liberty should come onto the panel more often. Anyway, that's let's go ahead and handle David's real quick. David Lindblom.
Yeah, David from Lindblom from Sweden said, suggestions on lighting of a whiteboard to make it less reflective.
It's angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. So it's just a matter of having lighting and your camera in a position where the reflection off of it, so if your camera is here, you just need to make sure that the lighting is the specular highlight is going to go below the camera. So usually what's happening is that your camera's here and your specular highlight is coming back and hitting it. So it's just the angle that you have that light on.
That or set up a telestrator like Alex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. See, or you can just do this. That's a lot simpler than a whiteboard. It's really, I will say that after a decade of this, it's really hard. Like you go to whiteboards and you're like, oh, I have to lift my arm so high and I have to turn my back to the audience and then I have to, it seems very painful. All right. Anyway, now we're jumping gears a little late, but we had a request to, and a suggestion, which I thought was great. Some of us were actually at the event, the infamous event that kicked off Final Cut 10. So Final Cut 10 is now 10 years old. Is that right, Alex? 10 years. And so it was announced. It was announced at NAB at the Mega User Group or whatever
the Super Meet in April of that year, 2011.
There was 1,000 people, and they rolled it out, and mixed reactions, a lot of panic, and then it rolled out. Now I know for some of us, for me, I just switched over. So we had Mark and Steve come into our office and train our staff in Final Cut 10, and just shifted over. It was not really, and dealt with many of the issues that we had in the early days. But I felt like it pretty quickly was. There was one day, probably a month into it, that I was editing something and just realized in the time it would have taken me to set the project up in Final Cut 7, I had finished the project in Final Cut 10. And I kind of realized that I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And there was a bunch of problems that popped out. But it was, I could see where they were going with it. But I think, that was the challenge. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think about 2007 or 2008, I met another plugin developer in London, and he said, that FX script that we're using to make plugins, there's a chance that Apple will completely get rid of that and replace it with a totally new system. And I said, that's never going to happen. They're going to give us some sort of warning about doing that, because the plugins that we make are useful. Because I used to make free plugins for Final Cut 5, 6, and 7. And then, of course, I saw this amazing demo of at NAB 2011 in April, and it looked completely different. But the most interesting part of it, of course, as you might guess for me, was the motion graphics part. And I kind of went through frame by frame of the video and trying to work out how that was all done and what it could all mean. And it just turned out that Final Cut is a combination of 3 different things. It was the new UI of iMovie, and I know saying it's iMovie Pro is actually a good thing. We'll come back to that maybe. Combined with the database from Final Cut Server, but combined with motion because of its real-time compositing and rendering abilities, because it was so deeply into OpenGL, which I know shows how old-fashioned it seems now. But that was an amazing combination. And I just jumped in, and my first task was essentially to try to make a few free things to help people deal with the transition. And one of them was a sound-only transition, so that people could dealing with the timeline. And I kind of started making lots of free plugins, and I really enjoyed it. But it was quite strange.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so I thought a lot about how deeply I want to go into this, because I helped Mike Horton start the Super Meet back in the early days. I was there at the first meeting. And so we went through a lot of years before this big meeting. And this was a meeting unlike any we had ever experienced for so many reasons. But I'm going to take you a little bit backstage in the days before. Normally, I would show up at NAB and I would talk to Michael about what's happening with the Super Meet, and he would tell me the rundown of the people who were going to be there. This year, when Mike showed up, he was sweating. And I have never seen him more verklempt, I think is the Yiddish expression, or something close to that. He was really stressed. And it turns out that nobody knew this when we were going in, but that Apple had revealed to him just before the Super Meet that they were willing to release a brand new version that nobody had ever seen of this software. So I want you to understand that coming up to NAB in the weeks before, Apple's famous secrecy meant that nobody had really known this. And I think there were a lot of contractual arrangements for other vendors to be a part of that. Of course, Apple says, we can do this, but we have to have the whole meeting. And I've always thought to myself, what an odd and difficult position to be put in, because at this point, the branding for the group in Las Vegas was the Final Cut Pro users group. That's what it was. And so everybody who is coming to this has that expectation. There is a brand new version that no one has ever seen of this software called Final Cut Pro. So I kept saying to myself, what would I do? I have contractual relationships with other vendors, including other competitors, where they're expecting to come to NAB. And obviously they've spent a lot of promotional money on their booths and their presentation. And suddenly it's all going away in favor of one company doing this. And so I'm going to leave that to each individual to decide, are you going to keep with your branding and are you going to do Final Cut because it's the Final Cut Pro users group? Or are you going to upset all these other vendors? Clearly they decided, or clearly Michael decided, and Apple had the clout. And I think it was serving the audience to say, it's Final Cut, it's brand new. That's the backstory. It was crazy backstage. We go into the evening. Famously, if you've seen Brad's movie, I was the guy at the gate who released the rope and let the crowd run into this meeting. And it was an amazing circumstance. I could tell you stories about before that, during that, and after that. But the signature thing for me is we saw a bunch of things we had never seen before. No one had ever seen a magnetic timeline. Nobody had seen avoidance of clip collisions. These things that were demoed that evening were really brand new, transformative, and had at least the potential to change a lot of circumstances about editing for everybody who liked to edit, particularly Final Cut Pro users. So I go to sleep that night. And in the evening, as if you watch Brad's movie, you also see that people were cheered. People were going, oh, I've never seen anything like that. It was a real big deal that night. I wake up the next morning and everybody is just angry and crazy and they hate it. And this thing is terrible. And oh my God, you ruined editing. And I kept thinking to myself, and this was my comment in Brad's movie, nobody had touched it. Nobody had used it. Nobody knew anything about it. but everybody was angry about it. And
they were frustrated about change.
Yeah, but I'm not even sure they knew what change was coming, because they'd never investigated it.
I think the fundamental problem that Apple did, I think the core mistake was just saying we're going to end this and just completely move to something new without any ramp. Like, basically saying this is the future, but we're going to keep, we're going to run both of these for a little bit of time, would have taken a lot of, it would have created a lot less panic.
I will grant you that, Alex, but that doesn't to me explain the next morning's screaming about it.
It does. It's just that, because the thing is that you're now telling people that they're going to take away the thing that they built their entire...
They didn't say that night. That came out over days afterwards.
But
that night, people were angry about it.
People's assumption that night, I was there. People's assumption that night is that there's not going to be another Final Cut 8. Like that was, people had assumed that, and there had been some rumblings of that already. So I was in the crowd, when they did it, and so people were like, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen?" And I remember someone saying, "Is not going to be Final Cut 8?" And they're like, you could just hear people say, "No, there's."
I wonder who said that.
I don't remember, but
nobody knew that. Apple didn't say.
No, I'm saying that we said in the crowd. It was pretty well known. Go ahead, Alex.
It may be that the price meant that their model, the economic model of the consultants, of the third-party businesses, the people that installed Final Cut, they go, wait a minute, this costs the same as Final Cut Express, the cut-down version. It costs $299, and Motion, Final Cut Studio doesn't exist anymore, and Motion now costs $50. It was the economic model that they're going, they're not interested in us anymore. And that was the thing, to some extent, whether they're right or wrong about it, that was the thing that was a bit of a shock, that essentially...
And again, for production people, change is not necessarily something that's welcomed, regardless of the financial model of the people selling it. When I was working on Star Wars, we didn't upgrade from After Effects. I think it was like After Effects 4.1 or something like that. We just stuck with that for years because we couldn't we couldn't change any of our any project files. And so we came out of it, and there was all this new stuff. We were like, wow, this is cool, and so at the same time, when you have people who had also just finished, a lot of them had just finished the transition of persuading people to go from Avid to Final Cut. That was really at the height of Final Cut's, like Final Cut had basically, the rumor of how Final Cut got to where it was that, to go further back, was that Avid, Final Cut, Apple bought Final Cut, or announced it, the original Final Cut. Avid head of marketing at Avid released a thing that said they're dropping the Mac platform, and that was their fire over the bow of Apple. Like, hey, this is back before the iPod. Like this is back when Final Cut actually was, not Final Cut, but Avid was an important partner for Apple. And they just said, we're going to drop the Mac platform. And Apple was still on fire at the time. And the rumor is that if Steve Jobs' head had spun, this is verbatim, had spun around and fire had come out of his eyes, no one would have been surprised. There was evidently a half an hour of expletives, and it ended with, we're going to pound them into the ground. It was a cute little project until Avid released that one marketing piece. And then I know, the only reason I know is because the story was told to me when all of us at Lucasfilm and ILM, a whole bunch of us got new Macs with Final Cut, and we were asked specifically, what does Avid have that we don't? Like literally, it was just a flat out, all these people in Hollywood were just given a computer, given a Final Cut, and just tell us what we're missing. And then they went to back it up, to tell us where how we got here. And then Walter Murch was basically given an engineering team, at I think Final Cut 3 was given an engineering team to tighten this all the way up, and after Walter Murch came out in the infamous meeting in MGLA, he did a whole 1 hour of, this is how Cold Mountain got built, and this is how I approached it, and this is what we did. And he was getting new builds, and he talked about it in the talk. He was getting new builds every day, of Final Cut to get it to the point where it could do a film. And that was the turn. That was the turn to get Hollywood into Final Cut. And then people started picking, if Walter Murch can build a film with it, then we can do a film with it. And so the whole thing started to roll. And then you had all these editors that were using Avid during the day and Final Cut at night, and then it started in that Avid during the day, Final Cut at night became Final Cut during the day over time. And so then they had done all this work to make the transition over from Avid to Final Cut. And it was really at the time that Apple did it, Final Cut had started to become like, oh, this is going to take over. And then and then Apple just went, and no, and I think that it was, I understand why Apple did it. I think Alex was going to get to, the largest editing package in the world is iMovie. Like it is, so we have to remember that. We have to remember like the largest editing package, the most installed editing package in the world is iMovie. The second most installed editing package today is Final Cut. And it's because people use iMovie, run out of, hit the glass ceiling. And if they're not trying to get into Hollywood or trying to work somewhere else that tells them what to order, they just get a Final Cut because that's the easiest one for them to go from one to the other. And that's why they changed it, was so that you could learn how to do something for free and then seamlessly move to something that is more effective. So yeah, go ahead, Alex.
It's also partially because I think that Final Cut is really useful for Apple as well as it is for editors. Because around that time, they're about to open the App Store and distribute Mac OS X. The next version was actually going to be coming out in August of 2011. That's when they released the OS 10 in those days, and that was the first one that came out via the App Store. 2 weeks before, let's see if we can test this system by distributing a 2 GB app to 100,000 people. That seemed to work, and that was one aspect of the cutoff. And the other aspect is we have to get people to start using AV Foundation because QuickTime, the libraries are dead and we want everyone to make new drivers. So that's why you cut off Final Cut Pro 7. And essentially, Final Cut then has become, until this very day, and Motion combined, this thing that sells Macs, the thing that sells new versions of the operating system, as well as being fantastic for millions of people. But that is slightly different from what 20,000 people want in Hollywood.
But remember, it's 20,000 versus 20 million. Like that's and a lot of what Final Cut got hit with is this marketing. I mean, it was on Conan O'Brien. They were like making, the editor, because the editors have the ability to get out there and tell the hosts like this is a horrible thing, and they're going to try to push back and everything else. And Apple had the luxury of doing this because they no longer needed them. Like let's be clear, like Apple could make this change. Companies don't usually make change this abrupt when they need that revenue. But Apple at this point, the iPhone was out. Apple's, this is a market where they could, and they said this, they could prep for the next 10 years, and Apple was willing to take the hit so that they could build the infrastructure that they needed for another decade. And I think that we see that now where I will say that Premiere and Avid feel very long in the tooth when it comes to, a lot of their infrastructure, and Final Cut's able to move a lot faster and more, and adjust faster. Go ahead, Bill, and then Barry.
Also remember that Apple very seldom works direct in these things. In those early days, it was Rami Katriba Digital Film Tree that helped Walter merge, not Apple directly. So they always are saying, this is where we want to go. They're using influencers to influence other people to go out there and spread messages. I think we sometimes give Apple direct, they did this. They wanted it done, yes, but they always work kind of obliquely because of this veil of secrecy that has been incredibly good for Apple.
Barry?
The biggest thing that we found when we transitioned, because we had the original back in 99, spent 1,000, upgraded for 300, upgraded for 300. The problem for us was that we have a lot of legacy stuff that had to go to the new version of 10, and they offered no path for that. 7 to X to 10 or 7 to 10 was a little plug-in software that made that available, but that was later. The problem in the transition that we had here is how to get from one to the other. We still use some of the video for some clients from back in that day. So it made it a little bit more difficult for us to transition. We did, but it took them about a year to bring up all the functionality that we were already using in 7. And so it just took a while. And so the biggest thing for us was that it did feel like Alex said a while ago, it felt like, hey, who are we? You just dropped us, out of the plane with no parachute. And so once we, after about a year, and then we started getting some of the multicam available, and that's when we Ripple helped a little bit, getting us up to speed on the new multicam and stuff. So it was a longer transition than, drop here, cut here, go there. It was more of, this will take us about 2 years to move from one to the other. But in the long run, it absolutely is, so much faster, better, easier to develop for. So it's
Yeah, and we, for us, because our jobs were very self-contained, like we do a job, do a live event, do a bunch of editing, and we're never going to see it again. It was really easy for us to make the turn. Like we just, like for someone like us, we just immediately just switched over, and there was almost no, I mean, I don't know if we ever even opened a Final Cut 7 project again. Like it was literally the day it showed up, we just moved into the new piece. Now, there were things that we wrestled with. There was some sync issues that were really bad, and also my company, my other company lost a lot of money because we were making about $30,000 a month on our keying software, DVMat, because the keyer in Final Cut 7 was so bad, and so that disappeared overnight. like as Final, we would have had to recode it, and the new keyer was so good that it was just like, and we're done, and it was how I took that was a pretty good ride. Like we worked really hard at it for a while, but for a long time we were like, making little adjustments and making it better. And it was just printing money. And I knew that eventually Apple was going to get around to making a better keyer. So it was like, we just wrote it until there was nowhere else to go with it. And we were fine. We just got out of the vehicle and moved on to another one. Go ahead, Bill.
So the other thing I think that people forget, what a big impact it had on this transition was, at that point on the App Store, the most you could spend was $1.99. Final Cut was the very first app that ever went on the App Store at the insane price of $299.
Right.
And there was, for people who are running digital marketplaces in this new internet thing, the idea that you could get somebody to put down a credit card to get $300 for a click was unproven and untested. The fact that they succeeded and got significant numbers of people to do that really is why I think in large measure we have online shopping now, because it was in its infancy.
Yeah,
and that just changed the whole paradigm. You can sell anything with a click.
I think it was proving. I mean, that's what we did with DVMat for a decade before that. But what was different was having it all in the store, proving that the store people would buy it in the store. But from a digital perspective, I mean, that's all we did was that, and it was painful. That's when people complain about the 30% that Apple charges for their App Store. I just feel like they didn't do it. They didn't do software sales in the aughts. In the 2000 to 2010, if you did software sales in the aughts, and you're really being truthful about what it took to build security, build the sales,
the authorization, the anti-piracy, the whole thing.
All that stuff. Yep. Like you're like, oh, it's a pretty good deal. Anyway, next question.
Moving up, our first one in this. 10 years ago, I heard a lot of uproar in my community about removing the ability to live capture in Final Cut Pro 7 from Final Cut Pro 10. While 10 and Final Cut Pro allow live capture via FireWire, is anyone still missing this feature on the new devices via Thunderbolt?
Well, we stopped recording like that. We recorded everything on Final Cut, and we were doing 444 capture out of a F950, to X-rays through Final Cut, which was, and then when we complained about things not working perfectly, both, anybody connected to it would just be like, yeah, you're the only one doing that. So we're not going to help you, but we did have to move to other capturing solutions. I think Blackmagic's software was Express, I think, was one of the places that we started capturing to. And then we just ended up moving to Drive, like exterior drives to do that. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I mean, I have in the last 4 or 5 years, I've sometimes plugged my DV camera into the Thunderbolt adapter into the, so I've done it directly into Final Cut. That still works. But am I still missing a feature to have a Thunderbolt device playing out video? No, I'm not.
Yeah. Next question.
Jason Sipe of Murrieta. Whoops, that went way off my screen. Excuse me for just a second while I get it back so I can read it. Soundtrack Pro was dropped a few years prior to Final Cut Pro 10's release. Logic has since seemingly taken its place. How often do you find yourself utilizing Logic in the same way that Soundtrack Pro was used?
Jason?
Quite a bit. I mean, I love the interplay between the two in XML. I am unaware at this point, and maybe just because it's been so long since I've used Soundtrack Pro, is there anything that Soundtrack Pro did that you can't do in Logic today? I don't think so.
Ease of use.
Well, okay.
I think that the issue was for a lot of us is that Soundtrack was really, really easy to use. It was lighter. Like it didn't have the bubbly interface that everything has, and it performed better on a smaller computer. Both Logic and I will say that both Logic and GarageBand feel heavy. Like when you move things around, there's just like this sluggishness to them that is less, by the way, on an M1, but before that has been more problematic. And so Soundtrack was just, for me, the right mix of things. So I do miss Soundtrack in the sense that it was just easy to throw things together really fast. And I find Logic to be a heavier turn to do that, although I've gotten used to it. And now Logic's way more powerful. Go ahead, Alex, and then Mickey.
I mean, I like Soundtrack Pro because it was like Sound Edit 16, which was like Sound Edit, and my parallel little recorder that I plugged in with a serial port. And so it was fine. And, you know, Audition can now do this amazing things where you're getting parts of the, you're copying and pasting bits of frequencies you can hardly hear from one place to another. I don't really use that. But I think essentially Logic, if you look at their help system, it is an album creation tool. And there's not much of I don't think the Germans who make it have got much feature film soundtrack thinking behind what they're doing in terms of object-oriented media, which you should have in your albums. But it was absolutely fantastic with actual vision and video and object-oriented video. So I think there is space for another thing. But what most people want, of course, is to have the features of Soundtrack Pro and also the mixing part inside Final Cut, like Fairlight.
Go ahead, Mickey.
One thing that the Soundtrack Pro had that Logic doesn't have, and this is quite a niche thing, but it's pretty relevant back in the FCP7 days, was Soundtrack Pro could output or export to AC3 files, which was kind of important back then. Because the Dolby licensing was built into your purchase of the software.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the next version of Logic looks like. I don't have any idea, but you know, there's supposed to be a lot more support for Atmos, so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, if Apple's going to be moving, by the way, if you're a background fan, I'm sorry, I fan kicked on that I can't have control over, but if Apple is moving into really focusing on Final Cut Pro, you would think they would have some sort of audio editor integrated in there, especially if they're moving the spatial audio area. And it just seems like Final Cut Pro is light on that, and Logic is the only place where you can fix that. But it doesn't feel like it fits quite with what you maybe want to do when you combine video and audio together inside of Final Cut Pro. So I'm hoping that Apple does do something with audio, but it's been 10 years. So
I think it's going to be interesting. I think that, you know, Final Cut, I think, is still, it's more important to Apple now than ever, because you know, as you look at immersive work and stuff that Apple's talking around, AR and all the other things that we're doing, being able to control the creation tools that do that allow you to sync. There's a really powerful, you know, connection between I'm giving you the tools to build something for the platform, that Apple can make sure that those tools have what they need to execute against what they need in the future for the platform itself. And so that's where I think the USDZ stuff gets really interesting as far as how that works. Go ahead, Alex.
Apple got a patent in May for a system for bundling a load of files together, the source files and also the final render, and then and the idea is you only re-render the files where one of the actual final render, if it's actually impacted by a title changing or some of the source files, all bundled together. So they're actually thinking in terms of object-oriented video right now, because that is the future. I mean, I was thinking back in 2011, the marketing folks at Adobe and Avid must have been jumping up and down with joy when Apple did what they did. But the engineering folks going, we're never going to catch up, because they just threw everything out and restarted over again. It's going to take us years before we've got the code to catch up. And they haven't.
Well, and the problem is that
you can't spend the money on it. It's not possible.
The market isn't big enough for them to do that, and Apple can spend into it in a way that they can't. And so that becomes that's I think becoming more and more prevalent for us as we move forward. The two platforms that are moving quickly right now is Resolve and Final Cut, and the other two are not moving very quickly. And so that's and both of the two that are moving quickly cost little to nothing. You know, like 300 or zero to get involved. And so that becomes a really challenging position for Adobe and Avid.
But the thing is that what Adobe and Avid are allowed to market their products, and there seems to be a kind of strictures from the wider Apple that I'm sure the Final Cut team are pushing against, which means that it seems that they're not the only way they're allowed to actually communicate with their market in any way whatsoever is new feature updates and their website. There's no person, because the crazy thing is, even though we may not they shouldn't really be led by the 20,000 whining people in high-end post. If those people could actually understand what Final Cut was in terms of it actually encoding the artistic intention of the editors in the file, so that you go, I want this frame to line up with this frame for an artistic reason, and that lines up. It's not because they happen to be one track above the other. It's the specific frame where they line up, which means you can communicate with the sound editor, with the graphics people, and your artistic intention as an editor, or to another editor. I can open up a Final Cut timeline and know why the other editor put that thing there. Whereas if you look at it in track-based editor, it just means, well, that could be a B camera, it could be an effects comp, it could be an alternate take, but the Final Cut, the actual intention of the artist is in it. And that, if only Apple were allowed to explain that or promote that aspect of it, then people go, yeah, I'm an editor who wants my artistic intention to be encoded so it survives through the process of post-production.
All right, go ahead, Chris.
First of all, thanks for letting me in. You know, I overheard a conversation. Or no, an Apple employee overheard me having a conversation, interestingly enough, with Felipe a couple years ago at one of the summits, and I made the comment that you just made, Alex. You know, hey, if they got the phone, you know, that they have plenty of money. And this person spun around in their seat because they were sitting right in front of me, and they said, "That's not true." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "The Final Cut team is completely self-sufficient."
Oh no, it has been. I'm saying they made the choice. So just to that point,
yep,
they made the choice to do it because they didn't. The company wasn't riding on it. Apple, the Final Cut team has been self-sufficient from the moment it went on sale. Final Cut 10, the Final Cut before that, and Final Cut 10 has been self-sufficient, and they've sold enough. I mean, I don't. Anyway, they'd be self-sufficient if they didn't sell another copy for a long time. You know, so they've done fine. You know, in that process.
And then the other thing that I'd like to say is that I think that what people have said and have said from the beginning, why can't Apple defend their actions? You know, the voices are squashed. The people can't get out in front of rumors and problems or perceived problems and defend them as quickly as they may want to. I think that what Final Cut suffers from most is the fact that the leaders of the team and the doers of the team, I don't think they're running on the same agenda.
The other thing is that Apple's number one problem, and I've been talking about this for the last 2 or 3 years, and we're starting to see it metastasize. Is Apple's number one problem is antitrust. Like they are not, their problem is not anything else at this point. They are so far ahead of their industry. And the thing is they're moving at the speed of a startup with the size of a market leader. And that is terrifying for everyone around them because there is no way to stop them. Like, you know, they're like the M1 has like outstripped what's going on. Final Cut is moving into that. They have a whole bunch of new products that are, most likely, we hear rumored coming out. There's no way so the number one problem that they have, so them getting into a high advertising thing against two little companies that are doing their thing. I mean, two little companies compared to Apple. That can be seen as, that can be used in an antitrust environment relatively, like if they really defend themselves and push down on that, that can be used in an antitrust environment. Like even now, just the weird little things that happen in App Store are being used in court cases against them. And so as part of a larger thing, they have to leave space for the other contenders, in that without, people who buy Final Cut buy Final Cut. The other thing is that I think that, again, my experience is when I work in New York or Hollywood or I work in corporate, I see a lot of Premiere and a little bit of Avid. That's like when we're working we see Avid and Premiere. When we work in social media, we only see Final Cut. The only social media folks that we see use Premiere, I don't see anybody in social media using Avid, but in Premiere, they use it because they have a hope that someday they'll be an editor or they'll be working somewhere in Hollywood at some point. And this is their way of getting that. But I don't ever see it anywhere else. Like I don't see like Final Cut is everywhere, in the social media thing. And that should also worry people like when they do it. And Resolve is still, Resolve is something that's done in color correction. And when we're doing heavy stuff, we do, but I don't see the social media folks aren't using it because it's not fast. That's what, like in social media, they're turning things over really fast. They're not getting paid per hour. so they don't get paid per hour to do something. And so they're like, they get paid per output, and so when you get paid per output, you move to Final Cut really fast. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with one reason why I have fallen in love with Resolve is the track-based model. Considering the catch-up bug in Resolve on the Mac, is it possible to develop a rhythm on Final Cut as the Resolve cut page does so well?
I think that Resolve's great. We were using it for projects. Speed is not the thing, or a rhythm is not the thing that I see in Resolve. Go ahead, Bill.
Listen, if you like tracks, edit in tracks. You should be able to do it the way you're comfortable and you feel great. Personally, that was one of the first things when 10 came in, and I didn't have to lay the video on track 15 and realize that the audio for that was 30 tracks away from it, down on the bottom somewhere, and that particularly as roles develop and we can move roles into groupings, and you can bring your audio that you're working on right now up to the level right below your video tracks. I can't go back to that old system of stripes. It just doesn't make sense for me anymore.
Go ahead, Jason.
Big +1 to what Bill said, and just in general, I've got to say, what really everybody spoke for so long that I'm realizing we're losing the hour. What really turned my head about Final Cut Pro 10 is it was the first NLE that took compositing seriously, that wasn't just cutting. And that completely changed my mind from the very moment I realized, oh, it's not compositing as an extra thing. It's compositing, because compositing is really what NLE is. And NLE, nonlinear editor, is by itself a ridiculous convention, when you're digital first.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
What sounds really weird, but what got me to kind of turn the corner was I had to stop thinking linearly and I had to start thinking spatially. So when I thought of using track models, I would just continue to move forward and look at what was directly happening in front of me. When I got to use Final Cut Pro and use the magnetic timeline, I can actually look around me and I can add in different things. That allowed my products to become more complex, but it was simpler and easier to use because of the magnet way in which things were interacting and tying together. So I would advise people who are having a tough time moving from track-based things that want to use Final Cut Pro a little bit more, change kind of the way you think a little bit, because it really is more spatial than it is linear.
Next question.
Andrew Lipnick. I'm sorry. This Jason Sipe first, and then Andrew. Murrieta, California. Will Final Cut Pro ever come to an iPad? No, this would be quite weird when iMovie is already available.
I think that, the iPad's got the new iPad has the horsepower to do it. So it's just a matter of it's just I'm sure that it has more to do with the interface than the power at this point. Go ahead, Chris.
I think it's been out for a while. It's called LumaTouch. It's just that Apple doesn't own it.
Right.
Not that they haven't tried.
Yeah. And I think LumaTouch proves to you that you can do all the work. It's powerful enough to the iPads are powerful enough to do incredible work already.
Apple should keep LumaTouch at an arm's length to fight your antitrust.
Yeah, there's
comment.
your antitrust fix.
Yeah, buying
it's like
problematic.
They did it. You could do it too. You're just not as smart as they are.
Right.
There's their defense.
Exactly, Alex.
That's why they're not going to talk about Final Cut Pro coming to the iPad at a Worldwide Developers Conference, because they said, hey, developers, come and make a Pro app for the iPad Pro. Oh, by the way, we're going to make sure you don't even go off the video market because we're going to take it all with Final Cut Pro. And the only reason why they might do that is to demonstrate a new pricing model, maybe in terms of upgrades and all that kind of stuff, to support developers investing enough money in doing Pro apps on the iPad. But Apple will have to come up with a whole lot of new rules of moving the ecosystem to something like the iPad Pro, all the plugins, all the extra tools, where they're going to be installed, how they're going to work. And they're going to have to come up with a load of new policies and rules, which weirdly enough may be more of a limitation than the technology part of it.
Yeah, I'm sure that it could run on it. It's just, all the things that Alex was talking about all the things around it is what's probably holding it up. Go ahead, Jason.
Could you see the iPad being used as a major interface with Final Cut, and maybe that's the way they bring it to the iPad? I'm
more interested in iMovie can already promote things to Final Cut, but being able to have some kind of cuts or comments, like I could see a kind of a sidecar experience where that there could be tools that tie back into Final Cut or integrate back into Final Cut from that could be really interesting. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, that would be called Frame.io. There's your sidecar experience, the way it ties in with the timeline. But I'll tell you, from a user interface standpoint, like, can it control this or whatever? As an editor who literally does nothing but edit, I need something more tactile than a piece of glass to touch. I remember years ago, somebody came out with some it was going to be this great thing, you know, it was a special remote control for Final Cut, and I didn't even have to look at it. I completely dismissed it because I said, well, for one, I have a remote control. It has 102 keys. It's called my keyboard. I don't need any more buttons than that. And if I can't feel it, that's not editing. That's playing Play-Doh or whatever.
Go ahead, Alex, real quick. We're going to start
I think
speeding up.
what will help with the ecosystem if they make it so that plugins and other tools will work on any editing app on Mac OS and iOS and other stuff like that. So you can have a plugin that you use in clips, you transfer that over to iMovie, the same plugin is there, and it goes to Final Cut Pro and it goes into Resolve. And if Resolve on the Mac can use that same plugin, I know people want to use OpenFX for that. But if Apple made it so, hey, come to our operating system on our hardware, we've got timelines that work with across all the editors who decide to implement those plugins, created in Motion, of course.
I would love to see Motion plugins open up, just to be able to open them in Keynote. would be pretty cool. Yeah, Chris, super fast.
Super fast. Speaking of clips, have you seen this new 3D thing where you can scan your room and it finds all the surfaces and then confetti falls and lands on your bed and on your chair? It's crazy. And it'll be interesting when Apple starts to pull together. I look at clips as like a test bed for what may become part of Final Cut. The dictation and stuff. When all this stuff starts to coalesce together, it's going to be super cool.
And it's going to be hard to reproduce anywhere else. And you know, we should assume that the LiDAR information and everything else is eventually going to find its way into Motion and Final Cut. Next question.
Andrew Lipnick of San Francisco. Hi, Andy. How much audio editing sweetening do you do within Final Cut Pro? Do you always use the DAW, regardless of how simple or complex a project's audio needs are?
Jason.
I'll use filters and generally compressors, and then after that, I'm straight into DAW.
Yeah, Bill, real quick.
Just the way that Motion is, the graphics intent are a subset of Motion, the audio intent is a subset of Logic. So all the filters and the rest of that work, I'm able to do almost I haven't touched anything other than 10 for doing voiceover work and for compositing things in 8 years. And so you can do a lot of audio works, but again, you have to think differently. You have to not think in terms of a DAW setup.
Yep, next question.
Barry Brittner of Atlanta. Did anyone else get Brimmer? I'm sorry, Atlanta. Did anyone else get hit with a takedown notice for illegal use of music license on YouTube from a stock bundle in Final Cut?
Yeah, here's why that happens is because people post something with that stock audio into YouTube, and then they claim their own video, and then that video is claiming the audio and the video in it, and then what happens is you're getting a strike or you're getting a takedown from something that doesn't have the rights to that. So what you can do, if that's the case, is it's actually a good way to make money for you if you're sure. You can contest it. If they contest it back and they lose, it's a big ruling on your end. The laws are set up so that if you're going to do a takedown, you can very easily do a takedown, but if you come back that second time, you're now financially accountable for that fight. And so if you're sure that you're in the right, be sure. But you can contest it, and it can be a much bigger deal if they then push down on that. Go ahead, Chris.
Barry, are you referring to years ago when Apple bundled a music library and led us to believe that we could use them forever, but then Apple's license on the music ran out and they went, oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
They sent legal notice to my client, not to me. And so it took me about 3 weeks to figure out where I got the music, then to go in and rewrite custom music and reburn everything on YouTube and re-upload everything.
Apple thought they were doing us a favor and they just gave us a bunch of headaches.
Oh yeah. I didn't use any of them, so I didn't know. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just an FYI, there's been a few of these sorts of copyright claims that come up with SME, which is Sony Music Entertainment, and it's the same sort of thing where people have used stock stuff and it belongs to a library that Sony have then later bought and copyrighted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next question.
And I apologize, got landscapers outside. Alan Snyder's up next from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, or Idaho. Alan says, if someone is just starting in video editing and wanting to go the Apple route, other than the money part, which is easier to learn? Do you start with iMovie or jump to Final Cut Pro, and why?
Go, Jason.
I would say if you are certain that you're going to like it, then jump straight to Final Cut. But the way that it's designed is, you can just dip your toes in, and if you like it, you can immediately apply everything that you know about iMovie to Final Cut.
Go, Jason.
I teach high school students film production. We skip iMovie and go directly into Final Cut. It's easier to go backwards if you need to limit features rather than trying to push them to go forward to learn new ones.
So much. It's much easier just to learn Final Cut if you know you're gonna go that direction. Go ahead, Bill.
I'll support either of those, but it doesn't really matter, because when you're learning to cut, what you're learning to do is cut, and you can do that on anything. It's sequencing of video imagery and assembly of ideas, not the software used. That is what an editor does.
But if you think if you know you're going to go, if you're just going to do a bunch of cuts, then and put those things together, then iMovie makes sense. If you if you're trying to use iMovie as kind of the gateway to Final Cut, just go to Final Cut. It's not that much harder. So next question.
Shane Foley in Ashland, Oregon says, is there a Final Cut plugin called the Fenwick? What would that plugin do? Would it add rambling mental chatter to your audio mix, convert all on-screen text to Comic Sans? Exactly what questionable use in production would the Fenwick plugin have?
Fenwick has ever used any Comic Sans.
Only
so coders, pay attention. This is a needed product.
Yeah, I think we.
I like the rambling mental chatter. That makes sense.
All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, one of the competitive advantages of Resolve is their deep audio post capabilities in the Fairlight page. Does Final Cut have similar capabilities, even with its unconventional model?
Not really. No, I mean, that's actually it's really nice to have all of those in one place. Go ahead, Jason.
This is why I asked the Soundtrack Pro question earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially as we start looking more and more. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they tighten up in the next Logic, not only Atmos, but a tighter connection to Final Cut to make it easier for us to do those things. But right now it's a little bit difficult. Bill?
They do not have a lot of the tools you're thinking of when you're thinking about audio, but they do have tools like Rolls that on the back end, I have a friend who's a trailer editor. He can do in one click what takes other people a week of turning out 200 versions for different stations and configurations. So yes, there are lacks, and there are also giant wins inside Final Cut for audio.
Next question. Oh, go ahead, Alex, real quick.
Essentially, you've got IMF, which is the interoperable mastering format. You create a single database, and it can produce all those 200 versions for every single TV station in the world, every single airline, all that kind of stuff. It's object-oriented media, because the idea of the future of media is that you send people a cloud of stuff, and then your playback device composited depending on who you are. And the track-based editing, it's not possible to do it that way. So there's going to be a point, there's going to be a break, and Final Cut's the only app that can do object-oriented media for the future of media.
Next question.
Gilberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia says, last time I used Final Cut 10, it felt limited, was when I was trying to keyframe lower thirds and couldn't smooth it with curves. Was it just me?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, those smoothing curves has always been, anything keyframing in Final Cut has always been a little fiddly. There are ways to work around it, and it'll do everything you need to do. It's just not the world's best. Blow up a big keyframe editor so that I can work in that keyframe editor kind of environment. You can do it, but it's not as simple.
Go ahead, Alex.
I made a plugin, I don't know, 2012 or something like that, called Smooth Move, and it allows you to control how the curves work in a few clicks, and also Grow Shrink helps with that.
Grow Shrink is killer.
So look for Alex 4D, number 4 letter D, and then Final Cut plugins, and you'll probably find them.
Next question.
Gilberto is back from Santa Cruz with, aside from motion, is there any reason why simple graphics animations from Keynote could not be ported to, could not be, I guess, ported to Final Cut Pro 10?
Go ahead, Jason.
None whatsoever. It works beautifully.
You're just rendering out the simple graphics and then putting them into Final Cut. They're not the actual animations, right? Yeah. So I think you'd still, yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
You can do both. You can kick out an MOV from Keynote, or you can kick out transparent graphics with an alpha channel from Keynote.
Right. Yeah. No, you could definitely do simple graphic animations, but you're not sending the actual animation data from Keynote out to Final
It would
Cut.
be an MOV, but it could be an MOV with 444.
Yep.
4
No,
by
no.
4.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just want to produce the graphics there. Although, again, if you were going through that trouble of doing that out of Keynote, unless there was something that was really missing there, I think that I would use Motion for that. And then, and Alex is the master of doing that, where you build the pieces in, and then you can be editing them in Final Cut. Getting back to being, and I will say that is one of the super features. Like, we can talk about a lot of things that Final Cut doesn't have or does have. The integration between Motion and Final Cut is one of the most important things that sets that pair apart, because you can build plugins inside of Final Cut without any code that expose only the things that you need and allow you to edit them while you're editing, is literally, to me, the killer feature. Like, it is just like this incredible. And as we start looking at USDZ, of being able to build those things out with 3D models and have it all built in and be able to just adjust what you need, rotations and everything else, it's pretty ninja. so that's, and Alex has done, we've had some hours or some labs with Alex, and we'll do more of those, but it's just an incredible connection between those two products. Next question.
Leland Best, Corona, Michigan, says, could someone explain the major differences between how Final Cut Pro works versus Blackmagic Resolve, and why would you use one over the other?
Go ahead, Jason.
There's a huge overlap between the two, but I would say that Blackmagic Resolve comes from a color space and works out, and Final Cut Pro comes from a cutting and compositing point and then works towards coloring.
Yeah, I think it's good. It goes. We use both, and we use Resolve for heavier lifting, where we have to do lots and lots of color, and lots of audio. But color is the big thing for us. The precision color inside of the HDR space is still the reason that we go back to Resolve, because we need more control than what we feel like we have in Final Cut, at least. But for speed and on a day-to-day basis, what I use is Final Cut. Go ahead, Bill.
Final Cut has a magnetic timeline and a keyword database that feeds that. Resolve does not. Resolve has a linear timeline and a traditional approach to assembling media. They are two, in my head, different thought processes. They're both, you can get great work done in both, but for me, magnetic editing trounces everything else I've ever touched.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Two observations. One is, I know of a camera operator who had never edited before Final Cut Pro came out, or Final Cut 10 came out. So he didn't have that background of using the timelines that we were all familiar with. And hence, when he sat down to try and use those older programs, they simply didn't make sense to him. Yeah. And he was able to do a lot more very fast in FCPX. I would love to ask for us to do a second hour on an actually fast editing program, and Resolve and FCP are neither of those. Can we have a second hour on Edius?
Maybe, but the problem is, I think you're the only user in the whole group. Like, we'd have to, like, that
might be,
that'll be right after my Fortran second hour. Okay.
I would join that.
Very fast. Yeah, I'm sure it's very fast. I'm just not sure that we'd be able to have a lot of people be like, huh? I don't understand what happened here. Maybe a Saturday lab might make sense, where we don't put it into a true second hour.
The first time I saw FCPX, it reminded me of Edius 3.5, which at that time was 2.5 versions out of date.
Go ahead, Jason.
Resolve is meant to be a digital intermediate. Final Cut is meant to be primarily for editing. They can do things that others can do, but if you flip that, that's kind of if you do the inverse, that's what each application does.
And I do think that, though, for heavier lifting, I do think that Resolve, what Blackmagic's doing is pretty frightening. Like, on the level of, it's not all working yet. All the pieces that they're putting together, but as you see them putting them together, you're like, it's not done yet, but when it gets done, it's going to be really hard not to use that platform, because I'm going to have all these bits and pieces inside of one thing that I can work on. And so I get where Blackmagic's going, and I see a future where there's a lot of projects that would just have to go into that project. But right now, again, I need something every day to cut something. I usually use Final Cut. Go ahead, Alex.
And the good thing about Resolve is it really is feeling competition and has felt competition from Final Cut over the years. It's not like Resolve is trying to be a bit more like Premiere or like Avid. It's trying to be like Final Cut in terms of its user interface and doing things better, like being able to have multicam clips and groups are actually on the same timeline, expanding them out. So they're taking some of the Final Cut ideas, and they have to deal with the track-based limitations, inherent limitations in the metaphor. But beyond that, they're making it look good. They're making it look clear, not too cluttered, not too encrusted like Premiere. So it's the least worst NLE or track-based NLE, or the last one to survive the 20th century style of editing. So it's the best of that lot, and it's best. That's the one to learn if you've learned other editing software before.
I will say, if you feel like if for some reason you have to do Premiere or Avid, I think that they're fine. You know, like you can get stuff done with them for the most part. But if you're getting into this, the two that are, you know, what we would call with a bullet in radio, which means they're going up fast, are Resolve and Final Cut. Like those are the two those I would pick between those two at this point, unless someone told you your job depended on learning the other two. Barry.
And I think it comes back to what Bill said earlier, and also what you said about the YouTube generation. Depends on what you're wanting to edit. What are you trying to achieve at the end of the day? Do you do a lot of heavy graphics? Do you import files from After Effects and Blender and other things like that, and use the motion plugins? If you do more heavy graphics, then yes, Final Cut's your better bet. You can get there quicker. You can reuse your components very easily.
Yeah, but we have to remember that Fusion's built into Resolve as well, which is a pretty powerful nodal editor, nodal effects plugin that we haven't gotten into too deeply. So a lot of power there as well. Alex, last word, and then we're going to move on.
But the Final Cut is probably the best for doing documentary work, because it can take any media, any size, and you can organize it in any way and change your mind afterwards. And there's no competition there. It's there's no, but it's a matter of people realizing it. And once they realize, then I think the pros will actually come to Final Cut through documentary making, and I think that's the way in if they want.
There's nothing close. Like if you go, okay, I want to do a documentary, because of the database and because of all the other bits and pieces, there is nothing in the world like that's not like I will argue that all day, every day. So, and we're about to start. I'm prepping a documentary right now, and we're absolutely going to do it that way. So anyway, so we'll talk about that more in the future. All right, so we're gonna end it. We're ending a little heavy. I got to get to work. I think a lot of us have to get to work, but thank you for the panelists for a great conversation. It was a good suggestion, Alex. I wasn't sure if we'd have a whole hour talking about it, but of course we ran heavy. It's what we do. And thanks to our producers who asked great questions and kept the conversation rolling once again, every single time. You guys are amazing. And we'll see you all on the other side, jumping in the post show.